The sun burned white over the street, and the air itself seemed to quiver with heat. Dust rolled across the ground in lazy swirls, catching against boots and skirts, slipping through the cracks of the warped boardwalk. A hush clung to the town, as if every soul inside had swallowed their breath and dared not let it go. She stood there, shoulders drawn tight, the revolver heavy in her trembling hand. Her black dress, still creased from the churchyard earth, dragged against her ankles. The wide brim of her hat hid her eyes, but her lips quivered as though caught between prayer and curse. The rancher stopped where the dust settled, a hand resting against his belt buckle. The cattle baron's brand glared from the iron clasp, a mark of power he wore as bold as his smirk. His spurs gave a lazy jingle as he tilted his head at her, studying her like she was some strange creature too fragile to bite. "You best step aside," he said, voice low and careless, as though he were talking to a child who had wandered too close to fire. The widow's chest rose with a sharp breath. Her knuckles whitened around the grip. Still, her voice came out barely louder than the cicadas shrilling from the mesquite. "I swear," she said, words catching in her throat, "I'll kill you if I have to." The rancher blinked, then let out a short laugh that scraped like gravel. "You?" His boots shifted in the dirt, a puff rising with each step as he came closer. You couldn't squeeze that trigger without fainting. From a saloon doorway, shadows of men leaned forward. A glass clinked against the table. The piano stood silent, a single string humming faintly in the still air, as if even music held back. Women at the upstairs windows pressed their palms against the glass, eyes wide, lips whispering the widow's name. The rancher drew a handkerchief from his vest, wiping sweat from his brow. "Last chance," he muttered. "Go on back to your porch, widow. Cry into your shawl. This street ain't yours to stand on." The revolver dipped, her arm quivering with its weight. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might drop it into the dirt. Then the steel caught the sun, and her grip stiffened again. Her eyes lifted beneath the brim, the faint glimmer of tears swallowed by something harder. Her breath hissed through clenched teeth, and she steadied the muzzle at his chest. The rancher froze, smirk faltering, disbelief etched across his face. "You're out of your mind," he whispered, but the words rang hollow, as though he no longer believed them. The wind pushed a tumbleweed across the street, rattling like bones. The widow didn't move. The town held its silence, waiting, listening, as the vow she'd spoken seemed to hang in the very air, unshakable, impossible, yet alive. And the rancher stared in shock. The church bell struck midnight, each toll rolling down the empty street like thunder in a canyon. Windows stayed shuttered, lamps dimmed low, but whispers carried through the thin walls. "Widow's gone mad," someone muttered in the saloon. A deck of cards slapped against the table, the shuffle too loud in the stillness. "She'll get herself shot before sunrise." From the corner, another voice answered, hushed but sharp. "You don't know her. You don't know what she was before she wore that ring." Boots scuffed against the floorboards, chairs scraping back. The bartender leaned over his counter, eyes narrowed in the lantern glow. "I heard," he said, his voice dragging slow. "She once rode with a name folks don't speak out loud. A name with blood stitched to it." The men laughed nervously, though none called him a liar. The wind rattled the shutters, and for a moment all of them sat quiet, as though listening for the echo of some forgotten gunshot. Outside, the widow stood behind her small ranch house, the moonlight cutting silver across her face. The revolver set open on the table, chamber gleaming empty. Her hands moved slow, practiced, loading, checking, snapping it shut. She didn't tremble here, alone. Her breath was steady, her shoulders square, the same as a soldier rehearsing an old drill. The desert night pressed close. Coyotes yipped far off, their cries scattering across the hills. She turned toward the sound, eyes hard as stone, then back to the pistol in her hand. Inside town, whispers grew heavier, spilling like smoke through every corner. Old men remembered seeing her years ago, passing through with a different name. Women recalled scars hidden beneath her sleeves, the way she carried herself like someone who'd lived too long with death. By the stable, two boys argued in hurried tones. "She's just a grieving wife." "No, my pa says she put a man in the ground before she ever came here." "Then why hide it?" "Maybe she wanted to bury that name same as the rest." The horses stirred, kicking against the stalls as though they felt the storm building. Back at her table, the widow lifted the revolver, testing its weight. The candlelight flickered, shadows crawling along the wall like restless ghosts. She aimed at nothing, arms stiff, eyes fixed far away. Slowly, she lowered it again, lips moving in a silent prayer. The wind rose, whistling through the mesquite, carrying dust across the plains. It sounded almost like a voice, low and warning, a reminder of battles not yet over. She sat there until the candle burned low, then stood and slid the revolver into its worn leather holster. The boards creaked under her step as she crossed to the door. In the silence, only the sound of her boots, measured and sure, marked the hours. And the town lay waiting, hushed and fearful, for whatever the widow's past would drag into the street come morning. Hooves pounded the dirt road, the sound rolling through town like distant thunder. Dust billowed, swallowing the horizon until the riders broke through, black silhouettes against the burning sky. The cattle baron rode at the front, coat snapping in the wind, silver spurs flashing each time his boots hit the stirrups. Doors slammed shut, curtains drew tight. From a saloon, men ducked low behind the bar as the first horse clattered past. The smell of sweat and leather drifted heavy through the street. The widow stepped out, black dress dragging across the threshold. The sun caught the steel at her side, a glimmer that vanished as quick as it came. She walked slow, deliberate, each step stirring the dust until she stood in the center of the street. The riders fanned out behind their master, rifles across their saddles, grins crooked with cruelty. The baron pulled his horse to a halt, nostrils flaring as the animal snorted at the heat. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the woman who dared meet him in open daylight. "Well now," he called, voice carrying sharp across the still air. The widow herself. "Thought grief would have swallowed you whole by now." The widow said nothing. Her shadow stretched long behind her, the revolver resting at her hip. The rancher she had faced days before shifted in his saddle, his hand twitching near his holster. His eyes flickered with unease, as though the memory of her vow still hung sharp between them. The baron chuckled, low and mean. "Step aside, and I'll leave you your porch and your grief. Stand here, and I'll salt the earth where you fall." A screen door creaked open at the edge of town. A child's face peeked out, wide-eyed, before a woman's hand yanked him back inside. Silence rushed in again, thick as smoke. The widow drew one breath, steady. Her hand brushed the revolver's grip, and the tremor that had once betrayed her was gone. She lifted her chin, eyes hard beneath the brim of her hat. The baron tilted his head, a flicker of recognition breaking through his scorn. "I've seen that stance before," he muttered, more to himself than to his men. "A long time back, in places where bodies piled quick." The riders glanced at one another, unease shifting through their line. Boots scraped stirrups, reins creaked in sweaty palms. The widow's lips barely moved, the whisper too faint for all but the dust to hear. "A prayer, maybe, or a promise." The baron straightened, face tightening. His voice cut the silence like a blade. "Draw if you dare." Time froze. The wind died. Not a single bird called. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first spark to set the desert aflame. And in the center of it all, the widow stood unshaken, the storm gathered in her stillness. The first shot cracked, sharp as lightning splitting timber. Dust burst from the street, horses reared, and the town exploded with echoes. The widow's revolver smoked, her arms steady, eyes locked. One rider slumped sideways, boot catching in the stirrup as his body dragged across the dirt. The baron's men scrambled, rifles rising, shouts breaking the silence. But her guns sang faster. Each pull of the trigger rang with certainty, each bullet finding its mark. A man toppled from his saddle. Another spun backward with a cry. Another dropped before his rifle cleared leather. The townsfolk gasped from behind their windows. A woman clutched her child's head against her chest, whispering prayers through the glass. The bartender froze with a bottle in hand, watching as though witnessing scripture carved into the dust. The widow moved like water through stone, each step deliberate, each breath timed with the hammer's fall. She reloaded in a blur, shells clinking against the ground, smoke curling from the barrel. Her hat brim shadowed her face, but her stance, cold, unyielding, told of battles older than this street, older than this grief. The rancher who once mocked her sat frozen in his saddle, disbelief etched deep in his eyes. The vow she'd spoken now blazed in every gunshot, undeniable and terrible. The Baron roared, spurring his horse forward. His revolver flashed, bullets whipping past her. She stood her ground. One shot from her gun split the air, and the Baron's hat spun into the dust. Recognition flashed across his face, horror dawning. "It's you?" he rasped, his voice shaking for the first time. "They said you were dead." Her lips parted, the words calm as steel. "I buried that name. But death don't stay buried." The Baron hesitated, fingers twitching at his holster, eyes darting between her steady aim and the men already fallen at his feet. The widow's revolver never wavered. The final shot thundered. His body jerked, staggered, then crumpled from the saddle, the dust swallowing him whole. Silence. Only the wind moved now, carrying the acrid sting of gunpowder through the street. The horses pawed nervously, reins slipping loose. The Baron's men lay still, their threat ended by a single figure who stood in the heat, black dress torn with dust and smoke. The widow lowered her revolver, smoke curling from the barrel. Her hand trembled again, but not from fear, only from the weight of memory pressing against her bones. Doors creaked open. Faces emerged. The rancher dismounted slowly, hat in hand, or written plain. "Lord help us," he whispered, voice hoarse. "She ain't no widow. She's a legend." The townsfolk stepped into the street, drawn as though to a flame, eyes wide at the truth revealed before them. The widow holstered her gun, the sound of steel against leather final, like the closing of a chapter. She turned without a word, walking back toward the desert sun. And the storyteller's voice lingered in the air. "They say the frontier remembers its own, and that day it remembered her name. A widow, yes, but more than that. A reckoning carved into dust and fire."